This is Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley. I'm the fellow who has a hyphen in my name. The hyphen is silent, but I am anything but that. First of all, I'd like to thank you for joining us. My name is Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley. I am your voice of Respectonomics. It is a Respectonomics approach, a Respectonomics presentation. And we have changed the episodes, the series that we're going to be operating with in the foreseeable future. We were, as you may recall, Compass Point series, and the Compass Point was designed to give ourselves the opportunity to see where we were, where we've been, and where we want to be. And of course, to provide the tools in order to help us along to get to those places. The key now is going to be a new series, a new episode, and it's going to be called the Asset Growth Series. Now, assets is one of the key components in corporate life. It covers an amazing waterfront. It takes you from people through to plant and machinery, to supply chains, to shareholders. Assets has almost a ubiquitous kind of expression to itself, and it's a very valuable way of examining how a corporation functions. At the same time, we think in terms of growth. Growth has become a word that has sort of almost mixed meanings, mixed reflections to people. The growth we're talking about is one where we talk about building capacity of the individual, building capacity of the leadership, building capacity of the plant, the machinery, the equipment, the productivity, in other words. So that's where the asset growth combination comes from. In my business career, the asset growth review was a key component of the way in which we serviced and looked after our clients. I'd like to bring you to this specifically because the asset growth review was something that you would offer to a customer. The customer would say every 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, whatever suited their particular situation. And when we had an asset growth review, we would look over the total base of their assets, so not only the financials, which was my career, but also looking over their other assets, which could include anything from family through to housing, through to cottages. It could be many different aspects, but it was designed to be encompassing. But here was two things that happened at that meeting. And the first one was that it gave us an opportunity to talk about where things had been, where they were going, what we expected, and so on, and to bring them up to date. But it also, secondly, allowed them, the customer, the opportunity to tell us where they were, what changes were happening in their lives. So there was a certain contiguous context to this of making sure that our interests continued to be aligned. And there was two other things then that went with that process. And the first was that one thinks in terms of buying and selling and trading and all those kinds of things in any commercial environment. And the deal was that there was actually no buying or selling in that review. It was a very conscious decision. It was designed to be informative, designed to be reflective, but it was not designed to be a basis then for creating a commercial transaction. From that, generally speaking, when there was a good level of satisfaction mutually, that we were enjoying each other's combination of service and patronage, when we had that arrangement working nicely, that was an ideal opportunity to what was called ask for a referral. You would say, if you're comfortable then, as we seem to be with the approaches that we're using and that you're entertaining, then do you think you have either friends or neighbors, somebody in your community that would like to hear about how we do this? So the asset growth formula is one that I'm very familiar with, and its basic creed is to be able to bring and to ensure that our interests are in mutual reciprocal alignment. In today's corporate world, I think most of us would agree that that sense of alignment is out of alignment, that the sense is that the corporation doesn't necessarily understand the customer, The customer doesn't understand the corporation. The employee feels much the same way. Shareholders cross their fingers, and suppliers wonder if they're going to have the order the next morning. So there's a lot of what you might call not disaffection exactly, but a sense where the lines are not connecting properly. So the whole concept of the asset growth series is to enable us to reinforce and to bring ourselves back into a more sensitive and a more realistic alignment. What business wouldn't benefit from having a closer understanding of their customers' requirements and needs? What business wouldn't love to know what customers are thinking of changing the way they operate, whether it's where they live, how they buy, how they sell, how they save, how they spend? And what about the employee? This is a particularly interesting point because if we say, I shall do an asset growth review with a customer, we should also be very mindful of the benefits of doing an asset growth review with the employee and with the shareholder and with the supplier. So we look at all four corners, if you will, of the corporation. That would be the employee, the shareholder, the customer, and the supplier as being the four primary components, and bring their interests together. Because the more we do that, the more we have that sense of alignment. It's like driving your car. If the wheels are in good alignment, you can accelerate, you can brake more effectively, you can steer better. So alignment is really important and very valuable. Now, if we're going to have this asset growth plan, we also need to understand a little more about what is the background to Respectonomics. When they're starting this new series, there may be people who will be listening for the first time. And it's worth reminding ourselves that the truth behind Respectonomics is that it is an economic formula, an economic convention. Economics is to do with the provision and the demand for products and services. That's the basis of it. So when you think in terms of, getting into a bus, or whether you think in terms of buying a loaf of bread, whether you think in terms of taking a holiday, all of these things come down to economic decisions. We can afford it, we want it, it's available, and so on. We don't need to get into the sort of the nitty-gritty of economics in that sense. But what we do need to understand is this. Respectonomics works on the premise of the economics of respect. That is what we're looking at. And respect is something that I, in fact, cannot demand. I may go out there, and I think a lot of us have probably had that experience when somebody has said to us, I demand your respect. And it's a total fallacy. You can't demand respect. And in a strange way, you can't really offer respect. But what you can do is use the currency that underlies this respect. If you think of the economy, when we talk about economics, everything translates effectively into a currency. Does it go up? Does it go down? Is it worth it? And we use the currency as a measuring tool. The measuring tool we use in Respectonomics to develop this respect is, in fact, dignity. Dignity is the currency. Dignity is a beautiful currency. First of all, you can't counterfeit it. You can't pretend it's something else. No, dignity is dignity is dignity. And then on top of that, it never changes its value. Well, you might in fact say it actually becomes more valuable, but it never depreciates. It's universal. In currencies, you think in terms of exchange rates. There is no exchange rate in dignity because when you provide dignity, something remarkable happens that does not happen in the normal economic world. In the normal economic world, if I spend money, the money goes in and something comes back. But when I do that, it's fairly straightforward, isn't it? That if I put it on my credit card is now down, let's say, $100. When we provide dignity, when we dignify another human being, when we dignify the environment, when we dignify our employer, when we dignify our supplier and our shareholder, when we engage in the business of dignifying another entity, another human being, we in fact bring that dignity upon ourselves. So going back to that $100 deal, that we put $100 on the credit card, and then you look at your credit card statement, what you will find is in the dignity card statement, you'll find that your balance is always rising the more you spend. The more you spend, the more you have in your account. That, in fact, is a sort of complete paradox, a contradiction of basic economics, isn't it? But here's the deal. When we dignify, it comes back to us in spades. So the part I want to look at now is if we agree that a corporation is a what would you call it? A basket of many assets. Let's think about how we dignify those assets. And the asset I want to emphasize here is the human being, the employee. Because when we dignify that employee, a number of things happen. And the most important one is it raises the contentment, it raises the value, if you will, not only of the individual, because you are now dignifying that individual, but it also raises one's own dignity and one's own sense of worth, value. So that in a corporation, in a business entity, in a transactional sense, when dignity is offered and then by definition received, then in actual fact, the result is accretive, meaning it grows incrementally, it grows upon itself. So let's all agree that the concept of offering dignity in a corporation to a fellow employee is totally valuable. Now, a lot of corporations are very good at networking their dignity. And what I mean by networking their dignity, it's giving it rather a clinical, antiseptic kind of feeling. This is when you get these boxes that you fill in and you tick the box and says, I feel this, I feel that, and somebody else says they feel this, they feel that. And your group and your business center feels lots of different things, but it's all in writing. It's all rather clinical. It's all rather sort of, well, if I put in the right box, and you even actually think about which box should I tick? These corporate surveys, and you find yourself, they say, of course, they're confidential. Well, of course, it doesn't take long to figure out which department it came from. And then once you're into the department, it doesn't take long to find out who was the individual. So in fact, what one does is one starts writing the reply or the input that we think is going to please somebody. So it runs the risk of being dissimulative. I won't go so far as saying deceitful, but I will say it's probably deceptive and not showing our true colors. One of the discoveries of Respectonomics is this. We can write to each other, even now talking to each other in this medium has problems. The truth of the matter is the best way to engage with another human being is physically to draw alongside them. I was talking to a retired employee from the production line of a major automobile manufacturing company, a Japanese one, I might add that. But what was particularly interesting is that she had been on the line for 35 years. Not once had a senior executive, senior member of the plant, come up to her, stood by her, and said, "What are you doing? How do you do that? What's it like? Is there something we can do that would make it easier?" She never, ever had that conversation. And the segue to that was, fascinatingly, is that they did have a system where you could write in your recommendations, suggestions, and all those things, and big boxes, and they would be moved up to senior management. Do you know what? The workers, the people on the production line, declined to do that because it was work, and they didn't feel like doing it. And I know that feeling. That's when you go onto an internet site and you're looking for something, and the first thing it says is, we want your name, we want your address, we want your telephone number, we want all these things about you, and you just chill and say, nah, I'm not going to give you that, and move on to the next site. So there's a certain degree of spontaneity in our response. Now, if that spontaneity is the case, then let's use it to advantage. And I have found in Respectonomics, the greatest ideas, whether it's working on the principle of fallow, whether it's on the principles of migrating one's interests into another human being, whatever it is, the spark has always come spontaneously. The spark is spontaneous, isn't it? It's like a flick of light, and it comes and it goes. So you want that flick of light to work. You want your lighter to be lighting the torch, so that when we talk about spontaneity, you have spontaneity when there is a physical neural connection. That means when the CEO comes up to the employee who's maybe polishing the doorknobs or maybe doing some intricate technical work, but when that arrangement is in place and the CEO, the CFO, the manager, the supervisor, but the senior people, the managers, the leaders, when they go and approach that individual and talk about what in fact they are doing, they will learn more about the trade, more about the depth of the production line, the service line, the facility, and so on. And at the same time, that individual will learn more about management, how it's contending with the issues it's contending with. That is asset growth review. Both sides coming together and recognizing their needs, their aspirations, their purpose, and so on. But when we bring people together like that with spontaneity, then we're going to get the spark, then we're going to get the results. Now, the one thing I want to emphasize is this, that in this corporate world we live in today, there is a sense of the what I call the unitization, meaning where the employee is considered a unit. I don't want to be poetic, but it does bother me that the word unit and eunuch do seem to have a certain soliloquy, a certain rhythm to themselves. We have every right, every obligation, and every duty to look at that other human being as precisely that, a human being. Being being a very important word. They exist, they live, they are. So that if we're going to acknowledge the human being, we do so in this spontaneous, drawing alongside approach. Excuse me. Therefore, when we think in terms of drawing alongside, we can do so with the idea that we are bringing dignity, and that dignity is a currency that works mutually. It's a brilliant, brilliant currency. It's a brilliant talent. I want to emphasize one more thing, though, as we look into this business of the asset growth. You may say, the corporation particularly may say, well, that's all jolly nice. Why do we need it? Well, I'll tell you why you need it. And I don't want this to sound like I'm being a gauntlet. I don't want this to sound like my way, highway. But I want to point out something. I have no right to look at any corporation and start telling them what they need. That is what a corporation exists with, and if they want help, if they want outside ideas, they will go and get them. But I can put three things in front of a corporation today, or a business, or a community, but a corporation in particular. There are three things facing the corporate entity today. And the first one is the velocity with which things are changing. Secondly, the issue of loyalty. And thirdly, what I would commonly call the cataclysmic risk in the economy. I'll go through each of those. The velocity of change. We all know, and we all talk about how fast things are changing. And it is true that if you go back to the Industrial Revolution, it took 100 years for it to mature itself. Then we went to the production revolution, that was 75 years. Technology revolution was 25 years. Now we're into a new revolution again of artificial intelligence. These revolutions, whatever results they may create, they are getting shorter and more intense and more disruptive all the time. So the basis of this approach of asset growth is to ensure that our assets are growing in accordance with, in rhythm with these changes, with this change in velocity. We need a workforce, whether it's literally within one's own corporation or across the board. We need a workforce that is responsive, that operates on a reflexive basis, that can look at change, encompass them, embrace them, not necessarily even fight them, but say, this is the way of the future. And if we provide the dignity to the human being, we have this far better ability to be a collective workforce that will accommodate these velocity of changes. Loyalty. Loyalty to the customer loyalty to the organization, employee loyalty, staff loyalty. It's a word that's become extremely loose. We don't hear the word loyalty, excuse me, we don't hear the word loyalty anywhere near as often as we used to. It used to be one of those clarion calls. But now loyalty is basically what's in it for me. There's that sense of opportunism. We need, therefore, all the more to draw alongside all the constituents of our commercial enterprise. So again, whether we're talking the employee, the shareholder, the supplier, or the customer, whichever component, we need to be able to develop a sense of loyalty. There's no question about it. Customers are becoming more and more, the market is becoming less and less proverbially loyal. People look at different brands, they go up market, down market, far more in with a sort of fickle notation than they ever used to. So the answer is, if we want loyalty, we have to be able to draw alongside. So we've talked about the workforce in the sense of accommodating the velocity of life. We can say the same for shareholders, the same for suppliers. We need to come to grips with these velocities and not turn a blind eye to them. We need to look at loyalty as something that's extremely valuable. And of course, it's reciprocal. Your loyalty is my loyalty, and my loyalty is your loyalty. The loyalty to one another is in itself accretive, it's embryonic, it grows on itself, and it is in fact a beautiful bloom. So we have now the workforce that believes in understanding the velocity of life and is also understanding why we want to be loyal to the cause of the organization. But here's the third one. When we do our Compass Point series, we do our asset growth series, you may have noticed that we're kind of careful not to talk about the chronology. I even avoid saying good morning or good evening. And the idea is that our message is chronologically democratic. It covers all times, all seasons, all time zones. It's not really meant to be at a particular time. Well, I'm going to put down my foot on this one now, because I think we are at a time when we need to examine the time. We're living in a time when there is a great deal of fear. There's a great deal of fear. There's a great deal of depression. There's a great deal of loneliness. And when you add these all together, you have to look up and wonder, what is the root of that? And the root of it is this uneasy acceptance or belief that all is not well. The foundations to the economy, whether we look at it through the mirror or through the filter of debt, whether we look through it in the social economic divisions, whether we look at money supply, whether we look at deficit financing, we are looking at a lot of things in life today where I think in our heart of hearts, we believe it is not sustainable. And we don't actually go around saying that. We almost ignore it. We put a blind eye to it and hope like it just isn't there. But the footings are extremely weak. And if you have weak footings, you take a barn, you take a house, you take any kind of edifice that has got weak footings or weak foundations, weak structure, it runs the risk of collapsing. And if you look around the world and you hear about earthquakes and collapsing buildings, the results of it are horrific. And I think we would be naive. In fact, I think we would be less than naive, I think, or more than naive. I think we would be irresponsible if we don't collectively look at and understand the cataclysmic risks in the economy, whether it comes from the nature of debt, whether it comes from the climate, whether it comes from geopolitics, not mine to call. But it is mine to call that we are living in a world where there could be significant disruptions, significant decomposition of what we think is normal life. If that is the case, or better, maybe I should put it more explicitly, when that is the case, therefore the need for a collective workforce that understands velocity, that understands loyalty, understands disruption and decomposition. When we have workforces that understand that, that is going to put us in the very best position to be able to weather the storms, and not only to weather the storms, but to be the source of the asset growth for which we have been called. I want to finish this with with one, I don't know if I'd call it a solicitation or an invitation, but here it is. We've talked about the need for spontaneous connection. And from a respectonomics point of view, from the standpoint of delivering the message, of giving people the tools to understand the grid of themselves, the grid of the corporation, to understand the legacies that we're creating, to understand the purpose of what we do, to understand the tremendous opportunities and the potential that reside within each and every one of us. We need to see this spontaneous connection. That, in my case, in the case of Respectonomics, comes about through workshops, it comes through presentations, physical presentations, comes through the proverbial after dinner speeches, but it is a message that needs to be out there. About 2 years ago, I was at a leadership conference in London, England, and a senior advisor there to many corporations. And I said to her what I was doing. And she had two comments. She said, first, she said, you're in the right place at the right time. And then secondly, she said, it's cutting edge. I don't think we should look at human relations as cutting edge. I think we should look at them as being an absolute necessity. And the time is now to come back to the human relations, to come back to the basis upon which we collegially, collectively, concordantly get on with one another. Because we are facing some imponderables, and the more that we can have each other's backs, the more that we can work together, the more that we can use that brilliant currency, that dignity. That is the dignity of expectation and a dignity that will bring a hope. It will bring a new creation. It will take us out of this sort of contraceptive idea that we can muddle through life. We may muddle through, but we don't give birth. We need to give birth. And dignity is the way to give birth to new ideas, to new prosperity, to new togetherness. Call on me. My name is Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley. I am your voice of Respectonomics. And my connecting email address is jeremy@respectonomics.com. jeremy@respectonomics.com. Let's get this asset growth truly on the road. Thank you so much for listening.